Hi, I'm Min Kim from Bonfire Studios, and I'm your host of this episode of the Game Maker's Notebook. Today, we have the pleasure of welcoming Jeonghee Jin, CEO of Pearl Abyss America. We talk about how Korea's unique culture and environment has shaped its games industry, and how its companies are evolving based on a long history of international expansion and the ever-growing expectations of a global player base. We hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to the show, I guess. I've never done one of these before, so I'm actually pretty excited. Today we have Jeonghee Jin. Do you go by JJ or Jeonghee?
Yeah, I just go by JJ.
Okay, yeah, I go by Min. So, yeah, glad to have you. So let's get right into it. Why don't we talk a little bit about Pearl Abyss first, which is where you work. Tell us a little bit about the company, and then we'll go from there.
All right. So first of all, thanks for inviting me for this special podcast. And I'm very excited about just talking about anything actually you'd like to chat about today. And Pearl Abyss, the company actually I'm at right now, we are a video game development publisher. And probably we are well known for Black Desert, the MMORPG franchise actually we built. And we're still a pretty young company. Pearl Abyss was born in 2010. So we're a little over 12 years old now. And probably for the first 4 or 5 years, since the company was founded, was just devoted to the Black Desert development. And we first launched Black Desert at the end of 2014. And since then, this 8-year-old MMORPG Black Desert actually has been doing pretty well, both in the West and the East in Asia. And still, Black Desert actually started as a PC MMORPG, but we also successfully expanded to the franchise to console, both Xbox and PlayStation, in 2019. And also, we actually launched Black Desert Mobile in 2018, first in Korea, and also rest of the world in 2019. So the Black Desert is actually just running on all the major platforms now. And we also just grew a lot. So when we first launched Black Desert, we were still probably like 100 developers only. And now actually we are over 1,000. I think we're a lot more than 1,000. I don't remember exact number. But also actually we are all over the world. Actually, we have more than several international offices outside of Korea, almost in every continent. And not only through the organic growth, but we also try to grow through acquisitions. So one of the biggest acquisitions we've made is CCP Games. Actually, we acquired in 2018. So since then, CCP Games, the creator of EVE Online, is also part of Pearl Abyss family. And now, not only Black Desert, that is a live game, we are also working on more than a few ambitious new titles, including Crimson Desert and Tokebi. So yeah, I think it's a very exciting time for Pearl Abyss. I think now actually we're really stepping up as a global publisher, and I'm very excited to see what's happening for Pearl Abyss in a couple of years.
Yeah, that's so wild for me. I mean, we're both Korean. I grew up in the U.S., and when I moved out of Korea, it was like 1984, and it was kind of a third world country in a way.
Oh yeah,
back
probably,
then.
yes.
And Korea's really kind of had its own rise, and like things have really been changing. But why don't we go? We're going to talk about all those things. Let's go back a little bit to maybe early days of growing up in Korea and what might have influenced you to go in video games.
All right. I think it's really hard to explain how I got into the video game industry, because I think I really just grew up as a gamer. And I think probably my generation in Korea have experienced a lot of things in common when it comes to video games. So probably know that, when I was at elementary and junior high, like arcade game rooms were so popular in Korea. And I used to go there like every day, after school. It was just a little part of my life. Of course, parents, teachers really didn't like us just going there thinking, oh my gosh, you're going to like an evil room and actually you're going to be a bad kid and you're going to ruin your life. But it was really fun. And I think actually I really just grew up as a gamer. And also after that, when I was in a college, there was late 1990s. And that was when the Korean PC cafes were really popular. They literally started, their business in probably mid to late 90s. And that was also a part of a lot of college kids' life. And we also just went to PC cafes every day, just not playing, StarCraft. And I actually played Diablo 2 amongst all the games. I played that game a lot. And I think actually we just went there even, for other things like just writing, reports and writing emails. And I think it was really just a big part of, the culture. So I think a lot of my friends also actually who started their career at video game companies actually really just enjoy the culture. And I think it was more natural path. Actually, a lot of those kids actually really just ended up in a video game industry. But for me, actually, I really just didn't choose a video game job as my first job after college. I actually started as a market research consultant, thinking I really never thought of just getting a job in video game industry. So it was a little complicated story there. But actually, my late father, actually, he passed away last year. But
so sorry
but he also actually ran a company that created one of the first generation MMORPGs in Korea. So I actually helped him a little bit, and I had a chance to sneak peek what was happening in video game companies back then when I was in a college. And then it was brutal, seriously. It was all online games business, and the live service was going on 24/7.
What year was that?
It was like late 90s and early 20s.
Okay.
So, yeah. So, early 2000s. So, there were a lot of online game companies that were born at that time in Korea, including Nexon, NCSoft. And my father's company was a lot smaller, but his game was actually one of the most popular online games back then. But, it was very common. Actually, the developers were actually sleeping in the office like days and days because
I've done that.
They really had to figure out. You know that, right? Because they really had to figure out, how actually the game actually can do better day by day. So all the decisions on the live operations actually happened on a daily basis. Actually, they monitored and actually fixed things, everything,
But there were no case studies back then.
Right,
You're literally like figuring it out
they
on the job.
literally like had to figure out everything. They just had to change all the game data or drop rates or, anything actually they thought actually could help on the live operations every day so that actually they can see the impact of changing those things. So I thought, oh my God, actually this is a really tough job and I'm not going to work at a video game company.
I'm going to be a lawyer.
Yeah, so actually I started another job after college as a consultant, which was pretty cool. And then for some reason, I think, I actually moved to my next company. Back then, it was called NHN. Now, actually, they kind of like spun their business off to 4 different businesses, like Naver, NHN Entertainment, their game business.
Massive company.
They're actually pretty big. So I actually moved to that company and actually started working on a video game industry since then.
Okay. Yeah, I've got a similar story. I don't know if this is like a common Korean upbringing kind of story, but I immigrated in 84 and then starting in 1990, I was going every summer to Korea. Same kind of thing. I love going to the video game arcades. These aren't like super nice. It's like a wooden box with like a stick and like some buttons.
You play, all these fighting games like Street Fighter, Tekken, and
Yep.
or Tetris. I was so addicted to Tetris.
Yep. And it was kind of like, I think, life or death situation. Like my cousins would not want to go because if they went there, they were like bad students and they might get in trouble. Like somebody might see them. And so that was an interesting time because I would play video games in the US and I'd go to like Blimpie or different places, play Street Fighter, play my console games, go to Korea, play arcades for like 3 months and then go back and forth. And then one day, like you said, PC cafes started sprouting up. I think after IMF, I mean, that was
Right.
a
I
pretty
think
big
it was
crisis.
probably right after IMF or actually around that time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Late 90s.
Yeah. So the developers that you're talking about at your father's company, they probably grew up in that same kind of environment.
Right.
And the inspirations are probably so different because I know, like in the US, I didn't know people made video games. So I grew up in the East Coast and I did the same kind of thing. I was an investment banking analyst. And I'm like, man, people make these things?
Yeah.
But they were all on the West Coast. And so, yeah, it's an interesting place to be, I think.
Yeah, I think it was definitely a very interesting time when I was at college. I think year by year, actually, things were very different. And because actually that was the time all the internet services were born, not only the video games, but also, all the video games actually I experienced first time in Korea outside of the arcade rooms were on online. So people in, my generation in Korea, we really haven't had that console gameplay experience because at first, actually, was arcade room, and that's also pretty social, offline
Yeah.
social. And then when we were at college, we all played online games, and we are also very used to doing like online chatting, and everything was actually kind of like a started online. So maybe, I think that's really like something Korean developers are very used to and very, familiar with, and in the beginning.
Yeah, no, totally. I feel like looking back, all the game experiences I had in Korea were very social.
Yeah,
They were
yeah,
never really about me playing by myself. It was me
Right.
playing with my cousins or watching them play something. StarCraft, Blizzard games, those were obviously like a really big deal.
Right.
And you played some StarCraft earlier on too, right?
Oh, I played StarCraft a lot. And I always thought I sucked at that game because all my friends were so good. But maybe I was not that bad. I don't know. Because actually my friends were so good at those games. I always thought, oh my God, I'm not really a good player, but maybe I was good.
Yeah, and it wasn't, I don't think it was just about the game. I mean, the game is amazing, but I remember, like, I've got this story where I was meeting up with my friend and he's like, oh, I gotta go with my girlfriend to play StarCraft at the PC cafe. And I'm like, okay, cool. We're going to the movie, right? He's like, no, I want to play with my girlfriend. And then he
Yeah,
texted
yeah.
me, he's like, oh, we broke up. And I was like, what happened? And he was like, well, a Dark Templar came into the base and my overlords weren't upgraded and she was so mad and we broke up. And I'm like, oh, Korea's a
Yeah.
very interesting place.
Yeah, that's not really just a unique story, I think. I also dated with my boyfriend at a PC cafe every day. So I think that was a thing in Korea back then.
Yeah, for sure. So what year did you like kind of make the shift into video games and why did you do that?
So I moved to NHN in early 2006. And then I think actually at that time, I was really interested in actually learning about the industry finally. So as I said, when I saw actually what my father's company was doing, I thought, oh my God, actually that's really tough job. Everybody has to live at their office, just working on their games 24/7. I was not going to do it. And then, the industry itself was growing really fast. And I saw there's like a big companies like Nexon or NCSoft were growing. And I was also working with, actually NHN was one of my clients. And I was actually working on, one of their research projects. And then I think actually I got an offer first. But I also thought, yeah, actually, probably it's a good time to learn about the industry because I still think actually the video game industry is really fun. It's very dynamic. And actually at that time, I saw year by year, the industry is growing. There were new games actually coming up. And then more and more people were actually interested in, getting there. So I thought it was a good learning experience for me at first. And then I just got in. And then since then, I think I've been really learning a lot. I don't think there is any more, more dynamic industry like video game industry is in the world. And also it's related to a lot of other things. Like you also have to understand, technology trends and all the new devices. And, this is also content business. So this also follows like in a content or like a hit business equations. So sometimes it's really hard to predict, what's coming next. So I think I've got really, fascinated by the fun of working in video games.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to think back. I joined Nexon in 2003, and when I joined, it was about 230 people. at Saegang. It was that black
Oh, yeah.
office, and I was there, and I'm like, man, this is a very
Yeah, I remember
intriguing
the
place.
time.
And people were just, like eating ramen, working at the office, making games. I don't think any of them had any. There wasn't any formal education at that time. It
Right.
was just people that wanted to make video games.
Right. I think a lot of people actually working in video games at that time were actually they started in their college days, and actually a lot of them also were like a graduate students actually who are working on like internet services, and a lot of things actually they did were the things actually they figured out by themselves, not really something they're like a former like a people told them or taught them. But I think a lot of things actually they did were actually what they created, in terms of their products or business models or platforms they built. I think actually that was the fun of working in a video game company back then. A lot of things actually you kind of like try things, and also you don't need to be afraid of failures, because people really didn't know actually what fails and what's gonna do well. So I think it was a really fun time just doing a lot of experiments and
Yeah,
growing the businesses.
Yeah, I recall that too. I remember Nexon early days, you never really had to ask permission for anything. You just did it. And it was a lot of trial and error. And even the free to play monetization stuff, people think like somebody really thought about that. And I think it was just all trial and error. It started with, I think, this quiz game called Quiz Quiz or Q Play. And they got
Right.
out of beta and they tried to sell it, made no money. And they were like, okay, well, lots of people like this game, but no one wants to buy it. And I don't even think the infrastructure was there to buy stuff. And so they're like, okay, let's just do some avatar stuff.
Right.
And during that time, like Say Club, all these places were doing like experiments on selling like avatar customizations. And I think that's how it was born. And then more people experimented on it. I don't think it was like a really intentional business model.
Right, I agree. When I actually first came to the States, it was actually in 2008. I was actually surprised by a lot of questions actually that were asked to me, like, oh, actually, how did the monetization, start in Korean video games? I really just haven't thought of it, because everything was free, by default. All the online services like emails or video games were free. And then I think actually Korean developers actually realized we just had to do something just to make money. So it was not really intentional, like, hey, actually let's make these like for free and let's just create some business models for them. But I think a lot of them kind of started all the services free by default, not really thinking too much. They were like, oh, actually let's just collect users first, and then we're gonna figure things out. I think the easiest thing actually for these internet services or games for monetization were probably advertisements, but that really just doesn't work well for video games. So I think somehow they just figured out, hey, actually we just had to make some things actually people would buy in games, and avatars and other things actually just kind of came up as one of the really good ideas. But then I think actually there were more things, like actually people kind of started selling things in game. There were in-game shops, so things really just came up more as a natural flow, because the games were free and people just were really just gathered as a community in games. And then now actually they just had to think about how to make money out of those. And then when I first came to the States, things were very different. It was still very console dominant market, and people were still buying games. So they were paying like $60, $70 upfront. And they were asking me like, oh, actually, I heard actually the games are free and you guys are actually monetizing in game. And how did it start? And what is the strategy? And I was like, oh, I'm not sure, but we just had to do it.
No, I think it was customer expectation for sure. And going back to the whole social beginnings of video games in Korea, I think it would be hard to say you have to buy it because then you can't play with your friend.
Right.
And so I think it was just a given that it had to be free so that you and I could play together.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so after that, what happened after NHN?
So actually, when I was at NHN, I thought actually I wanted to have a little more experience outside of Korea. So it's also in a lot of stories, but make it short, I actually came to the States for my MBA in 2008. And then I did my MBA for 2 years. And probably the original plan was just to study for 2 years and go back to Korea. But for some reasons, I decided not to go back to Korea, and I actually joined one of the video game companies in the States after my school. And since then, I've been working in the States.
What year was that?
So I came to States in 2008.
Okay.
So it's been 15 years
Yeah,
so far.
I think I came back. I was in Nexon from 2003 to 2006. I was working in Korea, which was really good for me growing up there and finally like
Yeah.
actually being able to live there and being an adult there. But I couldn't live there. Like I had to come back. I was like, I need to be back in the States. And I remember at the time being really offended at first where they were like, you don't understand this because you're not Korean. I'm like, what are you talking about? And then after a couple of years, I'm like, no, I'm not Korean. I'm actually Korean American. It's like very different. And I ended up coming back as well. And so I love operating in the US and I love Korean culture and all that, but I don't want to work there.
Yeah, I think actually I'm kind of similar. And it's hard to explain, but when I was actually in the States, I thought, definitely there are differences actually between working in Korea and working in the States. I'm not sure right now, like it's been 15 years. I really cannot speak, for all the Korean people working in Korea. But from my experience, I think actually there were still, a lot of things I quite didn't like, when I was actually working in Korea. I think the culture is definitely a little more hierarchical. And especially as a woman, I also felt actually there was, a little more challenges actually for a woman actually working in a company. And when I actually worked in the States, I thought actually it was actually better for me just to, learn things and grow, doing whatever actually I wanted to, actually focusing my career. And also because of the differences in the video game markets and industry between Korea or Asia and the States, I really thought it was a good opportunity for me to learn something new. I thought actually I learned all the things I had to know about running video games in Korea for a couple of years. Actually, I worked in NHN before. But things were totally different. As I said, I think actually whenever actually I got questions about how things work in Korea, I was like, oh, that's just so obvious. Why do you even ask?
Yeah.
But yeah, I realized, actually the landscape is very different. And there were also so many big franchises. And I got very also, again, fascinated by that. And I thought, yeah, actually working in the same industry in the States probably is going to give me a lot of different insights and also, get me in a very cool experience.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, now it's 2023. I remember when I came like late 2000s, there are very different expectations for Korean companies and the world. I remember it's like, hey, domestic games for like domestic market first. Maybe we'll go to China or Southeast Asia. And then the US was almost kind of like a forgotten place. It's like, hey, if we can do something there, fine. Otherwise, like, no big deal. I feel like things have changed a lot since back then and now. And like Korean companies, I'm going to guess, have way more expectation for what can happen in the States. Can you talk a little bit about that?
yeah, I think that's also true. But actually, I think Korean video game companies, even in early 2000s, I think they actually tried to expand in the Western regions. But
And they failed.
yeah, I think actually most attempts actually ended up failing. I remember this because when I was at NHN, I was also working on the US market strategy. And now I look back on what I did. It's a lot of things are really, I wouldn't say nonsense, but I worked on a lot of strategies, but I worked on them without knowing actually what the market really is like. So I think a lot of Korean companies actually attempted to, expand in the Western regions, even back then. But it was probably not really noticeable by a lot of US companies or by people here. Because I think they really just kind of tried to tweak things a little bit or just adopted the same business models and do very similar things in the States, believing the market is gonna also go that way. But I think maybe it was a little too early, or actually just you were just trying something so different from actually what the users in the States are used to. So it really just didn't work. But I think as the market actually has changed over time, I think these attempts are actually working better. and also being adopted better by partners here. And also, I think in the content business, I think in the content market, not only video games, I think there are more nationalities actually seen in the industry as a general, and also Asian content, or especially Korean content is becoming more popular. So I think probably the Korean or Asian companies are a little more, I think, a little more brave
Yeah.
to make more bold moves, thinking, hey, actually, this is also a market I can enter into. So
Yeah. I feel like some of the early challenges were like, not basic is not the right word. My Korean friends are probably gonna like not be happy about what I'm about to say, but I just don't think they've really understood the audience at all. So when we brought MapleStory to the US, I remember skin tones in the game, and you could select your skin tone, but you had to buy all the non-Asian looking skin tones as a customization. I'm like, what are you doing? They're like, well, people buy that. I'm like, you can't make people buy their own skin tone. And so it was kind of like at that level.
Right.
Now things are different, but I think back then it was all about like their exposure to the West, like the US and Europe was straight up only through movies.
Right.
Now things are different. So many people go to Korea. People travel outside of Korea, and I think
Right.
we're just kind of in a new zone now. But back then, I don't really think it was like that.
Right. I think actually they also just including myself, the understanding about international markets or Western markets was very limited. So I think a lot of things we did were also very limited. And just like you said, I think sometimes actually there were things actually people might call does make sense or actually not really smart actually happened because of that. But I think actually through those attempts and also with a little different trend these days, actually there are a lot more visitors actually from Western countries actually in Korea, and also actually Korean people also have more experience actually going outside of Korea and experience things, and I think those definitely just could help the Korean developers also have better ideas how to do their
Yeah.
business outside of Korea.
I mean, Black Desert, you said, is on console, right? I think once you decide to go on console, you're making a pretty bold move.
Oh yeah.
That, hey, we're going to address a different audience than what we have at home because there is no consoles in Korea. I'm sure some people have them, but that's not
Yes,
really
still
a thing.
console market is very small in Korea.
Yeah.
Yes.
So how does Pearl Abyss think about kind of the international zones? Because when I was running Nexon in America, it was we got the Korean main office building games for Korea and Asia, and then we were one of the offices saying, "Hey, look at us. Let me tell you about what players want over here." But that was a long time ago. And now it's Korean companies, including like film companies and music, like everything's going really global. And I think they have a global mindset. What is Pearl Abyss's stance on taking its content and moving globally? Like if you're going to launch Crimson Desert, like is that going to be day in global launch, or would that start
Yes,
in Korea
yes.
first, or how's that going to work?
That's the current plan. So we definitely just gonna target the global audience for our upcoming titles, and we did the same for Black Desert, but we did it one by one. So we launched Black Desert in Korea first, and then we expanded to more regions after that. We really want to have day one global release for the upcoming titles, but I think it's gonna be a big challenge. But I think actually we're gonna make it, and for a lot of Korean companies, I think actually this global market actually has been very difficult, and nowadays I think actually they really think actually there are good opportunities actually for them to be successful. And just going back to console, the questions you asked me, I think actually when we actually first decided to launch Black Desert on console, I think it was actually simply because we wanted to be on more game platforms. We finally realized PC is not the only dominant game platform, but all the Korean game developers were PC or mobile. So a lot of them still think actually if your game is on PC or mobile, then you can actually reach to most of the majority of the game players in the world. But that is not really entirely true, especially in the Western regions where still console is pretty dominant. So we thought simply, hey, why don't we just put our title on console so that we can have all these other players who haven't experienced MMORPGs like Black Desert also experience something new. And then we worked on it. It was a lot of work and it was a big challenge. But when we actually finally released the title on consoles, we actually thought it was a very good market for an MMORPG. And I'm pretty
What
sure.
year was that?
It was 2019.
Okay.
So
right
only
before
4
pandemic.
years. Yes, right before pandemic. And I think still many console players are more used to playing single player game. So actually this type of MMORPG is something new to them. So I think there are still challenges. I think a lot of people, a lot of players on console think, oh, this game is too complicated, or, oh, I'm not sure what to do. Oh, there is no strong storyline I have to follow. I think, the things actually that really work for MMORPGs are not really working in the best way for the console players. So there are things actually we can learn. But also, I think because this is also online game and live service game that brings, continuous revenue stream for the console platform partners, I think they also, believe in the market for, like a console players. I think nowadays console players are also just getting used to playing these live service games more and more. And I think I believe we are also setting up, good examples for the upcoming, online games or MMORPGs actually who are interested in, expanding their audience on the console platforms.
What was the business model, or is the business model?
So we're still pay to play, which means actually buy to play. So we sell the packages. We also have different packages so that actually people can choose from.
So you're buying the game to play,
Yes,
which is
yes.
very different, I'm guessing, than Asia, right?
Yes. So we actually have different business models for Black Desert in terms of the regions actually the game is running. So in Korea, it's actually free to play, and on PC, and mobile version is of course free to play. So they are all like in-game sales. But for console, we still keep it as a package. But we also have in-game shop. Actually, people can buy things. So we see different players and the behaviors, a little different patterns, depending on the platforms the game is running on. But all in all, I think this is good example actually how video game developers actually can adopt different business models, even for the same content, same title on the different platforms.
What were some of the player expectations when you put it on console? Was there any stigma about, hey, this game's from Korea, or things like that?
I think actually there were some people calling it out, saying, oh, actually MMORPGs from Asia are not great or
super grindy.
Yeah, I think there are still those comments, but I think actually it's not really entirely bad. Some people, some players actually like playing grindy games. Not because they love the grind factor.
They like the progression.
Yeah, that's the part of just a game experience. And the part of their character progression. So I'm pretty sure there are very different type of players actually who choose their favorite games actually depending on very different factors. And I think MMORPGs definitely offer some of the fun of actually those players actually really want to enjoy. And though there is still a little stigma about games from Asia or MMORPGs actually made by Korean company, Chinese company, but I think there are also players who actually enjoy those features and who actually just keep playing those games. And I believe there are going to be more those players because there is a component we call social, and we actually just bond our players in the community pretty strongly. So I think there are definitely pros and cons by having these stereotypes, but I think actually it's working well for
I think
us.
at the end of the day, it's just expanding. So it's like meeting different player needs. One thing that I was really surprised by recently is, I can't talk about the game we're making, but I did some research and met with some players and we were talking about the game, and I was so shocked with their expectations. Like, this game is free, right? And I'm like, well, what do you mean? Is that good or that bad? And it's like, well, if it's not free, my friends and I are not going to play it. And I just remember like 2006 to like 2010, where it's
Right.
like, oh, this game's, I'd never play a free game. And the expectation has completely changed, where players'
Right.
expectation is like, oh, the game better be free so that my
Right,
friends and
right.
I can play it. And I'm like, wow, things have really changed.
Right. I think even when I first came to the States, 15 years ago, when you call like a game free to play, then there is like a stigma about that game being
Bad
crappy
quality.
or
Yeah.
yes. So as I said, I was shocked because all the games were free to play. Most of the games, actually, first generation MMORPGs in Korea were also kind of subscription based, so they were not entirely free. I had to correct it, but because most of the online games were for free, so I really didn't have that stereotype. I'm like, but all the good games are free. But here, in the States, people were calling them like, oh, crappy free to play.
Yeah.
So I really didn't agree with that. But I also understood, why. Because, people were really used to, buying things at like a $60, $70 for a great content. And probably their initial gameplay experience in some of the free-to-play games were totally different and really didn't meet their expectations about the quality standard. But I think now actually it's been changing a lot, and a lot of people actually just prefer just playing free-to-play titles, and also just having an opportunity to play them for the first few days before also they buy anything after that. So
Yeah, it feels like it's probably a global expectation at this point. I remember like early days, it was, you do it to fit the market that you're going to, and then that ends up happening is like you're forking your experience, and it's different in all the markets. I'm kind of wondering, like, if we look into the future, whether it'll probably be more of a common denominator or a way to approach the globe and global communities. I think that's like the new zone that we're moving into. Whereas before we used to tailor for the individual market, which isn't bad, but then you start forking the development, which also isn't good, right?
right. Yeah, I think before, I think more video game companies really just wanted to figure out each market's characteristics and wanted to build up things for that specific market. Like, oh, actually, the Asian market is like this, the Western market is like this, China market is like this, and then made separate bills and create different business models. I think that's still valid. That approach is still valid, but I believe, including Prolobis, I think there are more attempts where making it work for the global audience. It really is not easy as it sounds, but I think one thing actually we also tried for Black Desert is just to give more choices to the players. So one example is actually our character customization system. So instead of just creating like all different characters that might work for each market, like, hey, actually Chinese people like these type of characters, and US players like this type of classes. We just had literally a lot of choices actually people can select from, and also gave them freedom of changing the classes to whatever they really like. So I think by having players have the power to create their own classes that can meet their beauty standard or whatever should their preference, I think we also kind of met those requirements that the game can work better for the global audience. So this is one simple example, and still I think you can also make the game work better by tweaking things that might not work for a certain region to better. But I think you can also make your game more global by giving more freedom or giving more choices to the players so that they can create things on their own.
Yeah, I feel like some of the the forking or customization was actually like business related, because I think early days the development happened in one country, say Korea, and then you sold it to a partner in Southeast Asia or maybe in the US or in Europe, and all those partners want to do what's best for their players, so they would come with their requests or demands, and then it would take the game in a lot of different places. For Pearl Abyss, do you manage or publish in all the regions that you are represented in, or do you actually have local partners?
So when we started, Prolabis started as a small developer. So when we first launched Black Desert, like in the 7, 8 years ago, we actually had local publishing partners. But now actually we self-publish Black Desert on all the platforms, meaning that actually we just worked on some of those agreements and then we just took over the live service. And now actually we are in charge of all the publishing business
Everywhere.
as well. Yes, everywhere.
Oh, interesting. Do you?
Not in China.
Yeah, totally.
yeah.
Outside of China,
everywhere
you're actually
except for China. Yeah.
okay. Do you then use Steam or how do you?
Yes, actually, we are on Steam too.
Okay.
So that
I remember that being pretty controversial for a
right.
while.
So we launched Black Desert on Steam in 2017. So we first launched Black Desert in the North American and European regions in 2016. And back then, actually, I was at Kakao Games. Kakao Games was a former publisher of Black Desert. So I was there, and that's actually how I also, moved to Prolabis after that. So when I was at Kakao Games, we only had our own platform for Black Desert, and I thought our brand was not strong enough. Both Prolabis and Kakao Games, and there was this very popular PC platform, Steam, and I thought, yeah, why don't we just put Black Desert on Steam, just making the entry barrier a lot lower for most of the PC game players in the States. Actually, there was not really good understanding about Steam and how powerful it can be in Korea, I think. So not many people agreed with my suggestion
Because of the platform fees, right?
yeah, so they were concerned and they were asking me, but why do we have to pay 30% to Steam when actually we can absorb all the revenue actually on our end if we just put the game only on our platform? So I had to go through a lot of discussions, and at the end of the day, I think we just successfully launched Black Desert on Steam, and now I think we are happy about what we are seeing on the Steam side. But
I don't know if you know this.
5, 6 years ago.
Is Steam viable? I know it's viable for Eastern developers to come west, but is it viable the other way now? Like, do people in Korea or actually use Steam?
I think there's still room for growth in Asia. So still, Steam is not the main platform, and most players in Korea and most other Asian countries are actually just entering the company's the main website for their PC, their favorite PC games first, not Steam. So still, I'd say there is a lot more room for growth for Steam because there are a lot of PC game players, but also at the same time, it's still not really working on the opposite side. If a Western game developer wants to launch their game on Steam, believing they can also pull a lot of Asian players, I don't think probably that's gonna work that well as they expect for now. But maybe, I think actually things are, market is changing very fast, and the console market is growing very fast in Asia in general, and also Steam is growing. So I believe it's gonna be probably better in the upcoming years, but not really working well.
So if you're making a game in the US or in Europe and you want to go to Korea or Asia, like what are the viable options for you to take your game there? So you could put it on Steam, but it's not going to get a lot of traction, I think is what you're saying. What are the other ways? Go direct and find a publisher?
I think it's really hard to say about a good strategy for a Western game company to enter Korea because it really depends on your product. But I think still probably just having a good partner is one of the good ways. But also just not self-publishing. If actually your product is already very popular and you have a very strong content, then self-publishing in Korea is also another way. And as there are very famous Western games that
like League of
are
Legends.
played, that are played by a lot of Korean game players already. Yeah, League of Legends and most of the Blizzard games are still very popular, and yeah, I'm pretty sure you can just find a way just to, grab those Korean PC players by just doing self-publishing.
Yeah, I feel like at the end of the day, it's kind of like how do you best hyper serve the customer base that you're going to have, and you can go with a publisher, Or in the case of Riot, they went on their own because I think they felt that they could do it better.
Right.
You know?
Right. Especially when your product already just proved the quality in the States or any other country, then I think Korean players are, they work hard just to get all this, market trends from everywhere too. So if they know that, oh, this game is good, then I think they're going to go for it. So of course, for the first time global release, it might be hard just to enter a country like Korea. But if, it's already, working well in your own country, own region, then I think actually Korean players, I think it's highly likely Korean game players already know that it's a good content.
Right.
Yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Let's talk a little bit about pandemic. So, I mean, you've been running a company during the pandemic. What's that been like, running an online game? What are some of the, I'm sure everybody went home and then started working from home, and
Yeah,
you're
I
running a
think-
live operation. I used to always call my job, like, I feel like an ER doctor, because there's always something that's going on. New Year's Day, I might be going to the office today,
I think probably it must have been the same for everybody, but my situation might have been a little more unique because I'm in charge of the US subsidiary company for Prolobis. So my team, Prolobis America, is doing all the publishing side work for Black Desert. And because actually all the devs are sitting in Korea and we're doing live operations and marketing, just very closely working with them. I think actually a lot of things were a little more challenging for us just to have everything just handled at home. So, for example, actually, we have a lot of people actually who had to access to the live ops tool that can be very risky if actually you just give access to people who are working from home. So there were some security concerns for sure. And I think actually we kind of just figured out how actually we could make it work for everybody at first because we just had to. But once actually there were less concerns about COVID, we started also having some people work actually in the office, and now actually we are fully back. So I'd say we are probably one of the companies actually who made it fully back already. And
How
it
about
was
in
a lot
Korea?
of
Are
work.
they working fully back
So
too? Or?
they, I think actually Korea had a little different situation in terms of pandemic and how they handled it. So there were some times actually most of the people were working from home, but I think actually even actually at the Prolobis headquarters, they had actually everybody actually back to work pretty early. So mostly like in 2000, early 2020, or actually even before that, people were just in the office and just work together in person. And I think actually there are definitely pros and cons for either working from home and working in the office. And of course, I think for some jobs, I think actually it's totally possible. Just you can work from home and be very productive, and sometimes it actually works better. But for some of the cases, actually, you really find it very unproductive, or especially for like a creative decisions or some, discussions where you really just find it ineffective.
Or
if you
people
just
that are starting out in the industry, I think it's pretty tough for them being at
Right.
home.
I think also for some, entry level, junior level people that I think that's not really working in the best way for training and, all the things actually you have to make sure, day to day basis. So I think actually we decided to just make people just come back to the office a little earlier because of that. So there were some challenges actually when I actually wanted to have people just back in the office at the beginning. But I believe actually people are a lot happier now because there is also fun just to work together in person and have more interactions in the office. And I believe
It's a wild
actually
concept, having fun and making games.
Yeah. I think I always say this, we are a video game company, and I hope actually people really work in a fun environment. And actually, when you work from home, it's also really hard to, cultivate that fun culture because you always see each other just, through the screens, and the interactions are not the same as actually
You have to
see
schedule
the
them
other
all.
people in person.
Yeah.
Right. So I really wanted to promote and cultivate that culture, just work together and have a lot of chats and share laughters and have more fun in general in the office.
I'm curious how people in Korea feel. I feel like Korea is a very interesting petri dish. It's like, hey, when a game becomes popular, everybody plays it, right? Like things happen really fast. And I feel like from a development standpoint, or just working on any team, like we got a lot of things for free before we went home. It's just being able to hear a conversation and all that kind of relationship stuff was always kind of for free. And then once we moved to an online kind of like office world, that kind of stuff wasn't free anymore. And looking back at Korea, I feel like one of the big strengths that the developers had was that camaraderie. Right, it's like feeling like you're part of the team, not necessarily sleeping at the office together. Hopefully, we're beyond those days. But that was, I think, one of the biggest strengths of the Korean companies is that their team
I
morale
think so.
was really high.
Yeah, I think so. I think there is definitely something you can call comrade. Actually, amongst the colleagues, they literally just call each other, brothers, right?
Yeah.
Brothers and sisters. So I think that also kind of come from more, close interactions. Of course, I don't want to just stick to that culture. You really just have to meet somebody in person because I think that's still more very obvious in, most Asian countries, especially in Korea. People really want to see you in person and finally believe in your existence. Like they are like, oh, actually, you're a real person. Now, actually, I hear you. I think there is still that culture. But on the flip side, I think there is, some, good side of just having that close interactions and they also want to understand you better as a person, just to work with you better. So in that case, I think just working in person together is really important and even critical for the success of the project. So they believe, of course, there are some jobs actually that are still, very productive and that work totally well, even without seeing each other, even once. But when it comes to, video game development and when it comes to like a creative decisions or creative, discussions, I think there is strong belief that, it's better just to, be in person together and understand better. And also, actually, you can grab more, context better when you're in person together.
Is that what's happening over there now? Is everybody back at the office?
Yeah, I think so. I think there are still, some people are working from home in Korea as well. But I think there is a sentiment that, hey, actually, it's a little better if you just work together in person than, working remotely. But of course, I think it's still controversial. There are people who believe, hey, actually, it really doesn't matter wherever you are. Yeah, as long as you're functional and just get your job done, it really doesn't matter actually whether you see that person, in face to face or not. But I believe, in some of the industries, like video game industries, definitely there are things actually that can work better when people actually work in person together. Not everything though.
Yeah, I agree. So you said Pearl Abyss has roughly 1,000 people now?
A lot more than 1,000. I have to look at the numbers again, but probably including CCP, actually, we're a lot more than 1,000. But even actually for Pearl Abyss and its international subsidiaries, I'm pretty sure, we're over 1,000.
How many
worldwide.
of those are on the development side, like making games?
I also have to look at the exact numbers, but I'd say roughly like over 70% are the developers.
Is all the funding coming from internal, or because that used to be a different thing too? Is like, hey, you want to make a game, you start finding different, regional publishers to fund the game. I feel like that's not happening as much these days.
Yeah, especially for us. We just self-fund everything.
And it's a public company now, right?
Yes.
Okay. So you have to do the quarterly
Yeah,
updates.
I think it's kind of hard for a video game company. But we also just went on an IPO in 2017.
Oh, okay.
So
how's that been?
I think it was great because we still had just only one title, especially back then we had only Black Desert PC product. So I think it was of course great milestone, great achievement for any video game company to be on an IPO just only with one product. and something actually we're definitely very proud of.
Yeah.
So it's been pretty well, but I think also for a lot of video game companies, just being a public company is also a little stressful.
1,000%. I feel like there's like a romance in Korea of like, oh, we're a public company. But I think for game development, it's really tough because your scorecard ends up
Yes.
being every quarter
Right.
and it's dollar based. And I recall, I don't know how it is at Nexon these days. I'm hoping, my friends are doing well there. But on the road to IPO, the company, in my opinion, changed a lot. And then once we hit IPO, it changed even further. And so I just remember like going up to that point, no one was really talking about the money. And then after we became a public company, all the targets are based on money. And so the, design decisions and everything is based on how do we hit this dollar
Right.
number, which players don't really care about.
Right.
And then over time, just things changed. So, I mean, I'm looking forward to maybe things swinging back the other way, where people are really more, player-minded and developer-minded, making sure creating a right environment for that creativity. And recently I saw this game called Dark and Darker. And, it's a pretty fun game. I mean, it's got some rough edges, but I was very surprised that was a Korean development team, Iron Mace, making that.
Right. I was surprised to see that one too.
Yeah, I don't know how many people they have, but I'm going to guess it's probably in the sub 100, maybe 25. Do you think that more of that will happen in Korea as well?
I think that's been already happening, and they're just one of them actually who just made a success debut on Steam. I think there are a lot of really good developers in Korea that we can call like indie developers or just a little bigger than them, because a lot of bigger Korean companies like Nexon and Soft, or just even Krafton or Prolabis actually, who are more like a younger companies, actually still create a lot of developers who really want to create something on their own,
That they
not
love.
really being a part of bigger company anymore. So there are actually a lot of really good, like a small to medium size actually game developers in Korea, like Iron Mace, who just made it Dark and Darker, and they're very creative. I think because they now actually really have a lot more experience on the video games, not just on a PC but mobile, but also consoles. And most of the Korean developers I know, they are, they eat everything. They observe things from everywhere. So they are veterans on PC and mobile in the most cases, but they also play a lot of console games, a lot of indie games. So they really get inspired by so many different things actually from everywhere. So I think their creativity combined with their strong work ethic, I think they already have that, capability just to be able to grow as, the next great, developer.
I mean, it's a wild time. It's got to be pretty inspiring with like K-pop and K-dramas being so huge. It's like,
Right.
what is it? Like 60% of Netflix subscribers have like watched a Korean drama.
Right,
I would
it's
have never
surprising.
bet on that. I always thought like Korean content was very specific for Korea, but it's becoming very global now. What do you think is causing that, and why hasn't that happened in games yet? Or
Yeah, I think a lot of people say, like a BTS or, some of the really just popular Netflix dramas these days kind of set a stone for the upcoming ones. But I think actually this trend, for K-pop or K-drama or K-movies actually has started a long time ago. So if you remember, actually, even like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, there are a lot of like a Korean, K-pop idols actually really just try to enter the U.S. market and, the Western market just by doing a lot of things. But they did small things, but they really just never, got this big as
they made it in Asia. Like, it was like go to Japan or
Yeah,
go to China
right.
and Taiwan and the whole Korean wave thing, and then all of a sudden that's swelled and gone
Yeah,
global.
right. Yeah, but before, like a long time ago, like even like a Big Bang or Wonder Girls, like a first generation of like a K-pop idols, they also tried a lot of things, but they never got really just a big fandom. But and then Psy, Gangnam Style got really popular. And then there were a couple of more before, BTS or Blackpink got really popular, like become like such a big, phenomenon these days. And the same for, movies or K-dramas. I think actually the trend actually has started like 10 years ago, 15 years ago. But now I think from all the trails actually the previous content developers actually made, or just the trial and errors actually they made, I think the new ones actually found a better way to make a success. And I think while actually they were doing that, there were more communities actually who were following the K content. And I think actually if we really just didn't have the previous ones, I think the new ones really just couldn't find a good way just to make a successful debut actually on their own. So I think actually there were step by steps actually just before and also behind the scenes. There were literally a lot of tears and the sweats and everything actually they actually just put as an ingredient for the upcoming ones. And I think those really just made all this K-pop or K-drama or K-movies like a syndrome, like a phenomenon like this big nowadays. So I think for the K-games, I just say like a K-games now, but I think actually we are also probably following very similar steps, because there are more and more Korean games actually that are becoming popular in the Western audience, small and big, including ourselves and Dark and Darker and so many others. And I think actually now people are realizing, even without just being fully aware of the origin or nationality of a game content, they're already playing a lot of Korean games, even realizing actually they're actually playing a specific Korean developer's title. So I think probably all this combined, I think probably there are a lot bigger Korean video game franchise probably in the upcoming years. And I believe that's going to happen for sure. And also, I also get a lot of questions about why actually these Korean pop or Korean music drama or all these Korean content are being so popular these days. But as I said, I think actually there are a lot of ideas all the time. I think Korea is after I came to the States, I realized actually Korea is a very unique market. As you said, there is a big fashion like every year. Like people follow big fashion when it comes to music, when it comes to food, restaurants, when it comes to like a specific hangout neighborhood.
It's fast.
It's fast. It's a big fad every year. Now, after 15 years, I left Korea. I even don't know what's really popular in Korea anymore, because it changes every year. And people follow that, even for women's clothing. If I go back to Korea, people say like, oh my God, actually, you're wearing something that was popular 10 years ago. You have to wear this because now this is a trend. So there's a very strong fashion in everything. And once one thing is really popular, then whether you're,
feels like
older,
it's so community driven.
Yeah, very community driven. People always talk about those like popular dramas and popular music in all their communities, online, offline, and then people really just try that. So it's kind of like all or nothing market, because once actually you are really popular in a certain segment, it spreads out very quickly. It's not that actually you're only popular in 20-something segment. It's not that actually you are only popular in high school girls segment. Once actually things are popular, even when it's like a subculture, it kind of spreads out very quickly and kind of become very dominant. But the bad thing is it also kind of phased out pretty quickly. So you really have to keep changing things so that you can continue your business. So I think Korean people are really used to surviving in that environment. They just keep thinking about
harsh.
How to make your business just go on, because things change very fast. And also I think still people work really, really hard just to get through those like a strong fashion. So I think just combining those culture and trend in most of the industries, I can tell there are a lot of creative ideas. Actually, people really just bring up through a lot of competitions. Oh yeah, one more thing. I think the culture itself is very competitive.
Yeah,
I think Korean culture, I'm not sure, but yeah, that's actually my personal opinion.
it's a high achiever culture.
Yeah, definitely. So very competitive culture. So you really just have to always compete with others and get in the best place. That's, I think, kind of ingrained in everybody's mindset.
Yeah.
So
A lot of it's very external, though. I'm hoping that this is my opinion, but I feel like the future is going back, internalizing what matters to you, which I think is happening more in Korea these days. Before it was like, hey, what does my parents want me to be? Or what is the market saying I should be? Should I be a doctor or a lawyer? It's like very external. And these days I feel like it's changing. It's like, what do I want for myself?
Yeah, I can
What
see
do my
that too.
what do my customers want? And just the advent of social media, et cetera, allows creators in Korea to be able to see their global audience and understand them better. So I'm hoping from a development standpoint, things like Dark and Darker, that people really go back to their center to be like, what do I really care about? What do I want to make?
Right. Yeah, I definitely can see that trend. So on top of that soil, combined with like hard work and kind of competition and, always having to, achieve something better. And also nowadays, actually, people really want to also create, something of their own, more unique, something actually they really can show themselves. So in terms of the content, I think there are more varieties and there are more creativities than before. So I think probably those are kind of like a stepping, this environment for a Korean content developers to be able to, succeed better in the global market, I think.
I'm excited about it. Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah. I haven't been back to Korea in a while, but I got to go. I'm sure things have changed. I took my friend once to Akgu, and I'm like, hey, let me show you Korea. And like, this is how crazy it is. Like, I take him to a physical place that's really popular, and it's desolate. There's nobody there. I'm like, what happened? They're like, oh, everybody moved over there now. I'm like, what?
Right, yeah, that specific
And now
place,
they're back, right?
Apgujeong, that was so popular in 90s and early 20s, and they completely died. And it was literally dead, actually, the
It
whole
was like
neighborhood.
Vanilla Sky. I was walking, I'm
Right,
like,
for about like 10 years. And now actually it revived and all the young kids actually go there, I heard.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's very, trendy
Okay.
market.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking with you. Wish you the best of luck. I'm hoping to see a lot of impact coming from Korea to the West. Obviously, I'm really partial to that. And hoping to learn from everything you all are doing.
All right, thank you. Again, thanks for inviting me. And it was a really fun chat.
Yeah, thanks.